Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today I want to talk about state control and emotional mastery and how mastering our emotions and not letting them master us is one of the most, if not the most important success fundamental one can pick up going through life in all aspects of our lives, from our romantic relationship, our finances, our professional life, our personal relationships, and our overall mental health as well as physical health and well-being. The ability to greet each day with as much enthusiasm and productivity as possible, and state control is massive in reaching this level. Now, not every day is going to be perfect. We're not always going to be in the best state. There is always going to be some sort of hardship in life, but mastering our emotions lets us greet these hardships with the best overall attitude that we can. Now, I want to start with words. Words are powerful. And language and how we talk to ourselves with our internal dialogue and how we understand things is extremely important. So in the English language, we also often ask the question, how are you? Which is a question which leads to quite a static answer and kind of puts us in a mental framework that however we're doing in the present is more permanent of a state of being that it actually is. In contrast, we look in Arabic, instead of how are you, we use kaif halik, which translates into something more like what is your state or how is your current state of being. This is a much more dynamic way of looking at our general disposition of overall mental health and emotional welfare. Kaif halik, what's your current state? Meaning temporarily, how are you? And that's all a state is, a temporary moment. Now, knowing our emotional makeup is very, very powerful because it helps us control our environment and our reactions to our environment and how we are dealing with our environment. When we work on being more cognizant of what makes us feel mad, sad, happy, angry, remorseful, guilty, anxious, apprehensive, a whole host of whatever other emotional states we can think of, we can better avoid the states when they don't serve us or are unnecessary. However, we must realize that more often than not, these states do serve us in some capacity. I'm talking about the seemingly negative states. And on the contrary, we can often realize that these very high positive states often don't serve us as much as they think we do. In fact, they can have, in the long term, more of a, deleterious effect on our overall mental or emotional well-being by potentially negatively affecting other areas of our life. But that's something we're going to get into in another video, inshallah ta'ala. So there is a high probability, though, that all of these states, positive, negative, are, especially when it comes to negative, are highly useful, and they're pointing to something much, much deeper. They're a signal for something going on in our lives. It might be some sort of external stressor in our lives that needs to go, or maybe kind of be, I don't want to say ignored, but reprioritized at some point, or a particular habit that we're engaged in, which is quite poisonous for our psyche or even our body when we start to realize how much our physical health affects our mental health and vice versa. And it's something that we need to change, a habit that we might need to change. These emotions are, as I said, simply signals more than anything else. And rather than letting them dominate us, we need to learn how to identify them, harness them, and use them in order to, realize what needs fixing in our lives. Recognizing our emotions, whether they're valid or invalid, regardless, more often than not, they are important. However, rather than living in them, we need to learn how to identify what they truly mean so as we can better live with and work with them. So probably the first time I realized this, but didn't really take it to heart because maybe I didn't really know I was realizing it. It was just kind of something shown to me was when I was in my late teens. I'd say probably around 18 or 19, and I was recommended this little gem right here. And I ended up buying it and I read it. I've read this one a few times. Obviously, I've done my work with it here. So it's called The Greatest Salesman in the World, and it's by one Og Mandino. Now, if you look up this dude's story, it's pretty interesting. And there's actually some speeches he made before he passed. So essentially, I'm not going to get into his whole biography, but a little bit of a background. At one point in his life, he was a seemingly hopeless drunk, and he was homeless, and he, was actually contemplated, that whole thing, punching his own card, so to speak. And one day he went to a library, when they were still a thing, a big deal, right? In order to get out of the cold, so he would read, and in order to get out of the cold, he'd go into the library and start reading. And he started picking up more and more books. And he learned skills through these books and started putting them into practice and essentially, changed the way he looked at the world and ended up becoming a great salesman himself. So, anyhow, in this book right here, the protagonist gets some scrolls with some advice for life success. And one of these scrolls, the scroll marked 6, talks quite a bit about emotionally mastery. That's pretty much what the scroll is about. And in it, it mentions these principles. So, in the scroll marked 6, we read, "And how will I master my emotions so that every day is a happy day and a productive one? I will learn the secret of the ages. Weak is he who permits his thoughts to control his actions, and strong is he who forces his actions to control his thought." Now, aside from the whole focus on happiness, another thing we'll get into, chasing happiness is kind of bunk. Um, we can gather a lot from this. And the main thing is that recognizing when our emotions are valid rather than living in them, we need to work through them. Work and our actions. So once we have any sort of quote unquote negative symbol, negative emotion, it's a symbol of where we currently are in any given situation, and we can take the signal, positive or in many cases seemingly negative, and stop reacting to our own thoughts and start being proactive, meaning having our actions control our thoughts, in forging our own emotional character, in driving our lives closer to where we want to be. We can harness our mental states and use them to identify problems that need solutions, as well as areas of strength we can pivot to and use to fortify ourselves and keep a correct course. Focusing on the things we're very strong in can often offset areas where we're weak in. So, example, personal one. For a long time, I struggled with what I thought was depression, and maybe it was an element of the law. I'm not here to say that depression doesn't exist. I was a mental health professional for half a decade, a little more, and it's something that people do need to take seriously. It is a real problem. It is a real diagnosis, and if you're feeling you have it, you really need to seek some professional help with that. Well, I can't stress enough, I'm not one of these guys who says, "Oh, depression isn't real," like, Andrew Tate or some other moron like that, you know, spouting that nonsense. For me, though, I realized more than anything, it wasn't depression, or maybe if it was depression, it was stemming from a lack of a sense of purpose or productivity, on top of feeling boredom that needed to be addressed. So, myself personally, I notice when I get into a depressed state, a funk, more often than not, if I do something productive, I am much more likely to get out of that state quicker. I think for me at least, it boils down to the fact that a lot of these depressed feelings, are rooted in a thinking of my past and myself with the addictions and the plethora of mistakes I had made when I was younger, and I realized that I'd wasted a lot of time. For essentially from the ages of about 13 to 21, I blew those years in a life of crime and addiction. It was a really dark time, and honestly, I was picking up the pieces and playing catch up for another decade after that. And a lot of this stuff kind of snowballs because even when we get sober, even when we clean up our act, we're still going to make mistakes. We're still going to have things that happen that are little brush fires that we keep having to put out while we're still putting out the remnants of a raging wildfire, maybe. And some of our past actions follow us for the rest of our lives in one way or another. We're always doing damage control. Once again, a topic for another time. Um, so we still play catch up every day, and it's breaking the habits of our past, and that can be an extremely difficult feat. So when I'm productive and I work on doing something to better my life in the future, I work on doing something to know that I'm just making the world a little bit better. It brings me a state of purpose. It puts me at a little bit of ease that I'm not being a total slacker, and I'm not, I'm doing something. I have some sort of power to change my state. I have some sort of power to influence the world around me for the positive. And it can be a vicious circle though, because we get to the slump and then we don't want to do anything. At least myself, I don't want to, and then I get more in a slump, and then I'm depressed and want to sleep. I don't want to, and then I get more in a slump and I don't want to, and it becomes harder for us to take that step of being productive, and then it might just be a little bit of a shot and it doesn't really take us out of it. So there's a consistency in actions that needs to be spoken about too, but once again, that's something for another time. So this can also go for positive states though as well. Like these positive states we get in, feeling great about something or whatever, it can distract us from maybe some areas in our lives that aren't doing so good. So maybe our professional life is doing good, and our social life is doing great, and our family life is doing great, but maybe we're neglecting our physical health because we're putting so much time in at work and at these social gatherings that we're going to all the time, and we're gaining this status, we're gaining this reputation, we're gaining this clout. Maybe we're snacking on a little too much food. Maybe we're not getting enough sleep because we're always going, 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 going. Maybe, we're having too many birthday parties and doing too much fun stuff with our kids, going to too much Chuck E. Cheese and eating too much pizza, whatever we might be doing, which in the moment is great, but we're not focusing on our physical health. So it's going to have a deleterious effect over time. And in 10 or 15 years, whoa, what's going on? Our body is deteriorating, and it might get to the point where there's only so much damage control you can do. There's only so much reversal of this damage you can do, and it's going to take a physical toll, which will then take the capacity for us to, you know, improve and enjoy the fruits of our labor in those other areas that were great in what would now be the past. So, there is hope, though. We can recognize these states, and once we become more in tune with ourselves, we can accept that we just go through this various states. We don't have to live in them for eternity, and to a great degree, we have control over them, and we can find a variety of ways to get over things like anxiety, depression, and anger, or the whole, cornucopia of quote unquote negative emotions. And that when we start feeling that, ooh, maybe these areas in our lives are really good, but once we, have the knowledge that, well, maybe I'm neglecting other areas in my life, we can have a little bit more foresight and be proactive and not just kind of let these emotions run us and keep us in this moment as if this is never going to pass. And we might be able to dial it back and have more, future planning or actions to future proof ourselves. I mean, we're still going to deteriorate. It's going to happen. The one thing guaranteed is life is that we're all going to die. That's a fact. But being able to identify our states and know kind of where we're at in various arenas in our lives, it gives us more cognizance and ability to shape our lives in the future so we don't neglect maybe other important areas. So inshallah ta'ala, in future videos, we're going to be going through a lot of these states, and I'm going to go be using some book knowledge and some of my own personal experience, as well as anecdotes from other individuals. So inshallah ta'ala, we can get ourselves equipped to deal with them and better use them to control the trajectory of our lives. So to sum it up, recognizing and learning how to control our emotional states is one of the most important things we have in building fruitful and contented lives going through this physical journey. So inshallah ta'ala, you've enjoyed this and found something beneficial. And until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.